Hey folks, and welcome to another edition of Zog Science. We are going to be beginning our ecology unit by talking about animal behaviors. So let's talk a little bit about the context of why we're studying this. Ecology is the study of organisms and their interactions with each other and with the environment. Most of the time, we kind of tend to think about the environment, but it is with each other as well. So we're going to start off by talking about the behaviors that are going to be occurring at the organismal level and how those kind of help explain some of the emergent properties we're going to see as we move forward into the rest of our ecology unit. So, ethology is the study of behavior, and there are kind of two ways we can think about behaviors. We can either think about the proximate, which is how a behavior occurs, or we can think about the ultimate, which is why a particular behavior occurs. So, for example, if we take a look at this bird, right, it's preening itself, it's cleaning. So, how is the behavior occurring? Well, maybe it feels the fact that it's dirty, right? So it begins to then, to clean itself. But why a behavior occurs? Maybe it needs to be keeping its feathers, nice and oiled so that it can fly, or maybe it's trying to look nice so that it can find a mate. Those are two different kind of ways we can think about how about behaviors. So whenever we're talking about behaviors, we're going to have some sort of communication. We need to have some sort of signal that is going to be transmitted from something, and then it's received. And basically, these can be one of two main things: either a chemical signal, which can be either a chemical from the environment or it can be pheromones given off by another organism. We can also have a symbol, and this is where the information is going to be transmitted kind of via symbols, and I'll show you what that means in just a moment. So chemicals would be something like minnows. They actually will release chemicals when an alarm goes off. So if like there's a predator or something like that, they will release a alarm chemical, and they will all then begin to move away from that. So in this case, the researchers, what they did was that they actually injected the chemical into the tank. And so you can see that all the minnows have moved away. Symbols, we can think about sort of like bees, right? Bees will dance when they know that there is food nearby. And the way that they dance will actually change where the food is located in terms of, once they know where the food is located, they will dance, and their dance changes dependent upon the location of the food, and that's how they are then able to communicate with their coworkers, who can then, respond properly. Now, there are two overarching types of behaviors. We have innate behaviors and we have learned behaviors. Innate behaviors are entirely under genetic control. For example, stickleback aggressive responses, which we'll show you in just a moment. And then we've got learned behaviors, which require experience to perform. So, for example, writing or talking or walking or any of those things, those would all be learned behaviors. So for innate behaviors, we've got two types, simple and complex. A simple is going to involve a fixed action pattern. So basically, you have something, a stimulus happens, and then you have a response. And as long as that stimulus keeps happening, you're going to continue to have that response. And so, for example, with sticklebacks, what they do is that the males are very territorial. So anytime they see an organism that has, or something that has kind of a gray top and then a red bottom, they're going to respond, and they're going to respond with an aggressive behavior. So what they did was that they took very lifelike models that did not have any red lines on them, no aggressive responses. Then they took unlifelike animals, or sorry, not animals, models that all had red lines on them, and the sticklebacks always responded, which is kind of interesting, and it kind of proves that it's an innate response, right? They're seeing the red on the bottom, they're going after it, they're being aggressive. We can also have complex behaviors. These are still controlled by the genes, but it's not just going to be one single response. So a lot of mating rituals, things like that, tend to be more complex behaviors, tend to be kind of innate behaviors. They are going to do many things. So for example, flies, they have a few different behaviors that they can do, but it's not like they're learning it along the way. It is innate into themselves. All right. There are 5 different types of learned behaviors that we're going to talk about. We've got imprinting, spatial, cognition, social, and associative. So imprinting, you may have heard of before. It's where young animals will follow, any other organisms that are kind of present during their birth or the time after that. This is called the critical period. And basically, during that time, they will imprint. And so there was this guy, Conrad Lorenz, who had some geese that were imprinted onto him, and they followed him around. We also have had, other birds that have been printed upon planes, or rather, I guess, pilot, and then they're following the pilot in the planes. This also, is a normal thing that happens in the real world, in the natural world as well. We've got spatial. This is where we have the establishment of memories based on the physical structure of the environment. And I'm sure that you all have experienced some amount of spatial learning, whether or not that's the layout of your room so that at night you're not tripping over things when you go to the bathroom or, something like that. But digger wasps, what they do is that they use physical markers to remember what their nests are. If you take all those physical markers and then you move them somewhere else, they will actually move to that location, even though their nest isn't there, because that's where they've learned that their nest is, right, using those physical markers. Cognition, this is what we tend to kind of put all of our complex behaviors in, so things like writing, this would be cognition. Basically, it's complex types of behavior. It's going to involve awareness, reasoning, recollection, and judgment. So, for example, the insects is able to recognize same and move forward. So they've got an entrance, and then there's a stimulus, which is the blue, and then there is another stimulus, blue, that leads to food. And if they go to yellow, then they would not get food. So basically, they learn, okay, if I see same, there's going to be food. Well, what do? The next time they see same, even if it isn't the same stimulus, they still are able to make a judgment, right, and reason, okay, if I see same again, I'm going to go for food, and that's what we see happening. Associative learning is also kind of known as operant conditioning. This is where an organism connects one environmental feature with another. So, for example, this blue jay will eat an insect, and when it eats that insect, if it doesn't taste good, right, it will then regurgitate it and throw it up, and it's going to not eat that insect anymore. This is also the famous Pavlov's dog experiment, right? Ringing the bell and having the dog salivate when it hears the bell. That is all associative or operant conditioning learning. And then finally, we've got social learning. This is where we learn through observation and interaction with others. So using your parents as a way to learn, right? So you learn to speak and talk and listen because you heard your parents doing it, or you learn to walk because you saw your parents doing it. Things like that. Those would all be social. This is kind of where culture comes around, and I got a pretty interesting video that I think is worth a quick watch on. Kind of takes us through social.
Looks like rain again today. Dark clouds gather and fill the sky. Don't know how to talk to you, just know how to say goodbye.
Have you actually got a driver's license? I don't think so. Did you see it's back there?
Go back where you came from. Learn to speak English.
Go back where you came from. What's wrong with you, Harry?
Is that what you think? I better not be.
So yeah, I thought that was an interesting video. It kind of is obviously a little extreme, but it shows you that in general what we, what it means for social behaviors to occur. Now, an important note: innate and learned behaviors are not completely separate, right? There is some overlap there. There are definitely times where behavior is both innate and learned. Why? Well, the reason is evolution, right? Genetics can influence behaviors, and behaviors can influence genetics. So let's take a look at some ways that can happen. For example, insects, they use calls to communicate, whether with mates or with other insects. And you can hybridize those calls by, crossing the parents of insects that might have two different calls. And what you'll end up with is a new type of call, right? Well, that is a behavior that is being influenced by the genetics. You can also have your genetics be influencing your behavior. So what they did was that they took birds and they took them from Britain and they moved them to Germany. So they're born in Britain and they moved to Germany. Well, those birds showed a strong preference when they were ready to migrate towards Britain. Okay, so when they wanted to migrate, they put them into this container where they could see which way they were going to go, and they were beginning to move towards Great Britain. Well, they took other birds that had been born in Southwest Germany, and they, put them in the same types of containers, and they also moved to Southwest Germany, even though they had both grown up in Germany, right? So the genetics of where they had grown up were influencing their behaviors in terms of which direction that they wanted to migrate. So they're not totally separate from one another. The environment is also going to influence your behavior, right? If you've got more food, it makes sense to be able to want to forage less, right? To be able to spend less energy finding food. So in this example, what happened was that they have Drosophila and flies, and what they're doing is that they are either grown up in a low population density or a high population density. Well, if there's a low population density, they don't need to go as far to find food. So that what they found was that their foraging path, that's what this data is showing us, is the foraging path, the length of it. The length of the path was less than a high population density, right? So the environment is influencing their behaviors. Kind of similar thing going on with the crows. For the crows, what they're showing here is that there's basically a most efficient drop distance. That there is a place where the crows are going to be using the least amount of energy to get the most amount of food, which is a huge constraint when you think about it, right? Organisms do not live in a energy limitless environment. We tend to kind of forget that a lot of times because we have as much food as we want, pretty much. But in the environment, that's not necessarily always the case. Fitness. Sexual selection can definitely drive differences in behavior. So, for example, what happens is that in a control group between these different birds, you have either crested males or non-crested males, or I guess they're calling them ornamented, same thing. Basically, if the parents are both not oriented, then there's no preference among the female offspring. However, if the males of the offspring are crested, then the offspring have a higher, are going to be more likely to basically prefer an ornamented male later down the road, which is kind of interesting, right? Because it's shows that the males, whether or not they have the crest or not, are driving the preferences in the females. So the sexual selection is driving the behavior, right? It's actually affecting what behavior the female is going to express later on. Kind of interesting stuff. Another example would be parental care, right? So parents who are going to invest more into their eggs are going to increase the ability of the offspring to survive, which is therefore going to increase the chances that their genes get passed on, which is good. But that is going to influence their behavior, right? They're exhibiting different behaviors than parents that are not investing into their offspring as heavily. And then we've got this idea of altruism. Altruism is kind of an interesting thing. This is where organisms interact in behaviors or engage in behaviors where they increase the fitness of others but decrease their own fitness. So, for example, what happens is that in these mole rats, these are naked mole rats, by the way. You can tell that they're not necessarily the nicest looking creatures, but they live in these clans and they have this kind of like alpha male, alpha female type thing going on. And what happens is that the non-alpha male and non-alpha male alpha females will sacrifice themselves for the male and female that are kind of in charge, because those are the ones that are having all of the offspring. And why is this good? Well, it's going to increase the proliferation of the organism's genes, right? Because there is one male and one female that are breeding, that are actually producing offspring. All of the animals have the same genetic information, right? So by sacrificing themselves, they're actually going to increase the proliferation of their genes, because now their genes are going to be passed on through all of their siblings, right? And all of the other offspring that the alpha male, alpha female are going to be having. So the idea of altruism is, it's not ever actually really totally true, right? Altruism is really, is selfish in a way, because you're still making sure that your genes are getting passed on. Obviously, it certainly decreases your own fitness because you get hurt. So, many times you can be killed, but it does help out your group overall. So, anyways, thanks for watching. Next time we'll get into more of what is traditionally known as kind of ecology. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.